Genesis chapter 14 records a Lord of the Rings type battle with 5 kings against 4. And in the process, 2 of the kings realize that, hey, things aren't going our way. And so they break their alliance and they make a run for it. But we're told that they then get stuck in the tar pits. They get stuck. So one, it's obvious they have broken their alliance, and then it's obvious that they're stuck with nowhere to go. Proverbs 29:25 tells us that the fear of man is a snare. You know, that's a really interesting choice of words, snare. Snare, that's something that's used by hunters. It's used to hold an animal of prey in place until the hunter can arrive and take it out. And thus, the animal is still alive, but it's being held in place. It cannot go anywhere. That's what fear does. It will immobilize you. I've even heard people say, well, he or she, they're paralyzed by fear, and maybe that's how you're feeling right now. Maybe you're feeling paralyzed or immobilized with fear, meaning you can't really continue on with life, or you can't really continue on with what God has called you to do because you're afraid. You know what? It happens to the very best of us. The question is how do we deal with it? How do we overcome this? How do we become emboldened and courageous? How do you muster this up? It was pointed out to me a while back that there's 365 verses in the Bible that talk about fear. Now think about that. That means there's one for each day of the year. So obviously it's the real deal. It's a real issue, and we can all relate to that. So how do we deal with it? I want to share with you just 3 things. One is to know that God is with you. To internalize that reality. David says in Psalm 23, perhaps the most famous chapter in the Bible, he says in verse 4, you've heard it before, even though I go through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Well, why not? He goes on to say, because you are with me. So he's going through a valley. It looks like the walls are absolutely closing in on him. And he can even see the shadows, all right? And that may be where you're at right now. You can actually see the shadows. Like, this is a real deal. This is a real issue. This isn't a figment of my imagination. You can see the shadows of it. That's how real it is. But David says he's able to continue on through that valley. Why? Because God is with him, and God is with you. There's never a moment when God's not thinking about you. There's never a moment when God's not aware of your predicament and your situation. So call unto him, cry out to God and ask for his help, and remind yourself through God's word that he's always with you. He sees what's going on, and he will comfort you and guide you through whatever has immobilized you. Secondly is God's word. And here I think about Joshua. Finally, they're at the Jordan River. Finally, they're getting ready to cross over into the promised land. And on 4 different occasions, he's exhorted to be not afraid. So reading between the lines, I think it's safe to presume that Joshua was dealing with some fear. He had been there before. 40 years earlier, he had seen the fortified cities. He had seen the giants. He knew what he was up against. But he's exhorted, don't be afraid. And in his case, he's told in Joshua chapter 1:8 to continue basically to recite God's word. He's told to never cease from reciting my words. And I would exhort you to do likewise. Get into God's word, the Bible, but also learn some verses that you can quote and that you can say out loud. And say these verses out loud. And they will help you in moving forward into crossing the Jordan River that you're facing, if you will. Lastly would be musical worship. Another thing with Joshua is that he would sometimes send out the choir into battle. And throughout military history, various armies have sent the band out. They take the choir, the band with them into battle. Even the Navy has a band. There's something about musical worship that encourages their spirits. And there's also something about singing these praises out loud that they resonate throughout the heavenlies. So maybe it's in your quiet time, maybe it's in the privacy of your own car. Let me encourage you, sing out loud. When you go to church on Sunday, sing out loud. Include musical worship as well in your spiritual diet. So may these principles of knowing that God is always with you, of knowing God's word, but then quoting God's word, and also thirdly, musical worship. May these principles help you move forward into life. And maybe if you feel like you're stuck, maybe these things will help you get you unstuck so that you can continue on with whatever it is that God has called you to do.